My name is Peter Cross. I work for Ballard Construction, and this is me here, FileMaker-wise. I used to be an independent consultant. I spent almost 20 years doing the consulting thing. I'm FileMaker 9, 11, 12, 13, 14 certified. That's where the journey ends. I got busy with work, and apparently I missed certifying for FileMaker 14, unless, of course, at this point I can speak Japanese, which I can't. So we might start again at 15. Well, name the pattern. I chose this topic because it's basically my story. I've always wanted to validate FileMaker by doing a big project that has crazy things in it, and at Ballard, we have done big things, crazy things with FileMaker. So we'll get on with it. The photo is of me during a ride that I did this summer. It's what they call a century, which is 100 miles, a legitimate century. We also have kilometer centuries, but this is a legitimate one. And the reason I'm so happy is because I'm only a couple hours in at this point. I'm also a dog lover, a dad, and as you guessed it, a cycling fanatic. Little bit of background on Ballard Construction. Ballard was founded in Grand Prairie, Alberta in 1978. We consider ourselves Canada's leading power line contractor. We have full service capabilities for power lines, distribution, substations, telecommunications. If it's got a shun at the end of it, we do it. We serve clients all around the world, and we're distinguished in our ability to manage our safety aspects on our project as well as our environmental stewardship. We're also part of a larger company, Quanta Services, which is based here in Texas. And together we form what we consider to be kind of the penultimate in the safety, in the power industry in North America. So these are all the power lines that we built in Canada, about 10,000 kilometers of them. You can see the gaps where there's not a whole bunch of people in Canada, but we've done a few. Obviously Northern Ontario and Labrador have got some gaps in there. And globally, these are some of the countries that Quanta is working in. Unfortunately, the map's a little bit out of date. We have a lot going on in Europe, more so than when this diagram was made. We maintain the largest fleet of specialized equipment for the work that we do. There's about 60,000 pieces of equipment that we work with, and we employ, Quanta employs about 32,000 workers. So we have more people than equipment. I guess we don't use it all at once. So when I arrived in Ballard in 2013, I was really excited to start building software. They had a need, and I really wanted to fill it. And I had big plans, really big plans. But I soon discovered that there were some barriers to implementing FileMaker in such a large organization. More so than any other client I'd encountered as a consultant. One of the biggest barriers that we have to entry is our deployment. A lot of our projects are in very remote locations, and there's just no infrastructure. Like in the photo here, this is an ice road that we were using in northern Saskatchewan, and there's literally no cell connection here, there's no Wi-Fi, there's nothing. Sometimes we're able to set up a satellite link between a camp and our head office, at which point we can exchange information. If we're close enough to a city center, sometimes we'll bring in a cellular booster antenna, and then we can provide service to the camp that way. But it is an occasional connection. It goes down frequently, and it's unreliable. So you can imagine deploying software in these locations is a challenge. We literally have no tech support in the field. Anything that we deliver basically has to be self-sufficient. Our next challenge was licensing, and there's kind of two sides of the coin of this. I spoke about it earlier in my other session. When I arrived at Ballard, we had a licensing problem. We were purchasing our licenses from FileMaker in 1 to 5 seat increments. Yes, 1 to 5 seat increments. And if you can imagine, even buying our licenses in 1 to 5 seat increments, we were the fastest growing client that Ballard had in Western Canada, 1 to 5 seats at a time. Our rep loved us 1 to 5 seats at a time. We had a challenge though, because we were going through those licenses. It was hard to manage which license belonged to which person, and we needed to clean that up. As FileMaker gained traction within the organization, we were able to make the case for a site license at Ballard, and that really simplified the process of acquiring software and implementing it in the company, because essentially we had free rein to install whatever infrastructure we needed from a FileMaker standpoint. This is where FileMaker really helped us out, and if you're working in an organization, if you're an FBA, or if you're an in-house developer and you find that you're just not able to connect the dots on a deal with FileMaker, it's a very good time to bring in your rep. For me, I could take the deal so far, but ultimately I had to step away and hand that off to senior management and bring in somebody from FileMaker who could sync the deal. And they were able to do that. They were able to set up custom licensing for us and come to terms that I didn't even know existed, having been a previous FBA. And it was really great. One of the other barriers that we had to entry were security concerns about the apps that we were putting out in the field. So we had to figure out how we were going to deal with that. The senior manager of IT had this vision that he wanted to take Active Directory into the field. And we thought he was crazy, because there's just no way to do that where you don't have a network. It was impossible. We checked everything, we looked everywhere, there was just no way of doing it. And eventually, we found an API. And that API was able to facilitate the communication between our mobile application and Active Directory to provide basically a up-to-date instant communication as to whether we had a valid user on our hands or not. And then with that, we were finally able to secure our app to ensure that if we have staff turnover in the field, if somebody got fired, we're able to take that authentication out so that the app is no longer going to validate those credentials for the user. It was a big deal for us. Essentially, when the user authenticates, they get a token. That token's kept alive for 2 days. And as long as they continue to sync and their account's still valid, the server will continue to honor that token. But if they lose their device or put it away, or they don't sync for a while, then they have to re-authenticate from scratch. The biggest hurdle that we had for FileMaker in our organization was actually the credibility of FileMaker as an enterprise app. And this was actually one of the things I was talking about in my earlier session. You need to find the moments of truth that are going to make the difference inside an organization. And for us, ESS was one of those moments of truth. Essentially, we were able to develop a system for our estimating department that connected to our back-end SQL databases, and all of the data resided in SQL Server. FileMaker was merely a pass-through for the data that was going through the interface. We were able to develop a transactional model where we had a custom data dictionary that validated all the data before it got written to SQL, so we could make sure that only good data was going in. And of course, it was all authenticated through Active Directory. So Active Directory was a big deal for us because it meant that the FileMaker apps could be validated, users could be added in the same way through the same process as all of our other apps. So the management of those users could be centralized with app support. App support was in charge of those those accounts. If somebody got terminated, their access was revoked immediately. It greatly simplified the process, and it took us out of this world where access to the systems was a free-for-all. Accounts could be shared. People who no longer worked for the company could still access systems using Active Directory. That was all instantaneous. This is an example of the app that was built for our estimating department. So it's an estimating application. It's capable of doing roll-up bids in the billions of dollars. It has custom calculations. It honors all of the functions that are in Excel because our estimators were used to using Excel. And plus they can make their own custom calculations for converting data, converting units of measurements, calculating the weight of structures, all the rest of that. And then using that data with the productivity information stored in the database to determine how many man-hours it was going to take to build a structure. That wasn't good enough. They wanted to take it on the road. And so I made an offline version of this app that you could literally take away from SQL Server with the data stored in FileMaker, and then later bring that app back to the office, and the data from the FileMaker database would be pushed back into SQL Server, and all of the different versions of that bid would be kept intact. The app is basically 100% FileMaker. There are no plugins. It's just basic FileMaker code. Well, not basic, but out of the book. So when I was talking about moments of truth, this app actually created a moment of truth in our organization. It's unfortunate that this app is not actually in use, even though it was worked on for a very long time. There's a bit of a attachment to Excel at the moment. We can't quite pry them free of it. But the thing was that when the director of IT saw this application, he saw something. He realized that he actually didn't understand what was capable with FileMaker. And he pulled me aside after I demoed the system and told me so. And it was at that moment I knew that we had traction in the organization, that we weren't going to have to push uphill as much as we had been with the app, that we were going to have a little bit more freedom to be able to develop inside the company. So the point that I'm trying to make with this is that this kind of, again, bleeds into the earlier presentation, is that when you get the opportunity to fill a need in the organization, usually the first project is key. And if you can fill the gap that exists so well that you leave no doubt whatsoever that FileMaker is the tool for the job. And by that I don't mean that it's got lots of bells and whistles. It's just that you take the requirement and you give a solid fulfillment of that requirement. Even if it's a simple set of requirements, that can quite often make a big difference in the organization. So the SDK, I don't know about you guys, but for us it made a huge difference in what we were doing. In the early days when we started doing SDK work, FileMaker Go work before the SDK, it was a little bit of a convoluted process. Users had to open FileMaker Go, and then they had to open the system, and then if something went wrong, then they had to go back, and they were always looking at the recents screen. They were never looking at what was on the device, so they could never see what they were looking for, and So the SDK changed all that. It allowed us to build a packaged app that had a custom icon and really helped us deliver something that looked like an enterprise app. And then beyond that, once we sorted out the back-end communication between FileMaker and the web API that we had for our timesheet program, we were in the enterprise game. We could have as many clients as we want, connect to that web API to deliver those timesheets into the timekeeping system so that they can land with all the other projects. So the initial build of this app took 3 months. Granted, that was the initial app. It was more of a proof of concept than anything else. So that functionality was built in 3 months, and the previous development effort had gone on for almost 2 years in Objective-C, where the IT department had hired an outside consultant, brought them in, and they were trying desperately to build a mobile app. And we managed to kind of get to the initial line in the 3-month mark. The problem that the iOS team using Objective-C had is they couldn't keep up with the litany of updates that was coming out from Apple. So as soon as they were getting close to runnable code, the code base would be updated, they'd have lots of bugs, and they'd have lots of problems on their hands. Unfortunately for us, when we started this project, we had to honor pretty much the interface of the work that had been done on the original app. So it's not a flashy app. And we have deep hopes that we're going to get to redesign the interface of this thing at some point and then come back and be able to present like, wow, we've got one of these apps, and oh, look at it, it's so slick and all the rest of it. But the point is it does the job, and there's a lot of people that use it. And over time, we're making little tweaks here and there to make it as good as we can. The initial app used JavaScript to communicate the timesheet from the web viewer up to the server and back. Since then, it's been updated to incorporate the JSON features of FileMaker 16. And of course, we're getting a magnitude better performance on that. So in my job, basically since I started working with Valard, I don't ever get to finish anything. I get to start things. I rarely get to finish them. And we're actually fortunate. We have my buddy Mike here, and Mike has taken over the development of Volt, and he's taken it from the proof of concept that I built into a functioning app. And he's the custodian of it. And if you get a chance to talk to him, I'd seriously suggest it because he knows this thing inside out. So the integration with .NET, again, was huge for us. Once we could prove that we could integrate just like the other apps in our arsenal to SQL, we had an enterprise app on our hands. And then having the ability to deliver an actual app with the iOS SDK further proved that we could deliver something in the enterprise that was solid. That app basically opened up a whole new field of users because we had users working in the field who were previously submitting paper timesheets who could now do it electronically through the app. So this is a very large body of users, and we're still kind of filling out where this app goes and how many people are going to be using it. But it's growing. Eventually, we are going to automate the connection between the Volts application and then our ERP software, JD Edwards. That's more of a SQL thing. But once we've done that, then we're going to have complete electronic delivery from the iPad all the way to accounting for that data, which is going to be something else. So yeah, there was a bunch of technologies that helped us do this stuff, and each technology kind of has its own project or its own story of how that came together. But each of those technologies were kind of the cornerstones of how we built basically our FileMaker department. So here's an example of what our timesheets used to look like, and Andy actually showed this in the Tuesday session, so it doesn't need much explanation other than it's ugly. So if you're a single worker working in the field, you'd fill out one of these for your entire week. If someone's working on a crew of people, they would fill out one of these per day with everybody who's working on the crew. So for us, obviously this is the work rut. This information is coming into payroll. Payroll's having to decode it. They're having to determine what the proper codes are for the things that are on here, make sense of it, and then punch it into our software so that people can get paid. After, of course, we're able to provide a streamlined report. This is the report that comes out of our web system after what comes in from the iOS app is merged with the data that's entered into the web app. So this is kind of a compiling of all that timesheet data that we have. So once we'd proven that the SDK would actually work, the entire development team was given an ambitious project. And that's kind of on the idea of rapid application development. Could we actually deliver an app quickly? So the team was basically given a week, and in that week we were to develop a website, a mobile application, tie it all together with security and everything, and have it ready to go. Everybody in the department focused on the delivery of that application, and it was really cool to see because everybody was working on the same thing. So if you had a question, you go grab somebody because their priority is to work on this app. And it was very cool. We managed to crank it out, and it was a very inspiring week. Basically what we'd done is we set a whole new standard. We'd accomplished that thing that we always talk about as FileMaker people. We always say, oh yeah, it's rapid application development, right? But when we'd actually completed that, we'd actually delivered on it. And it was like, holy cow, there you go, right? There's no more argument anymore. It's actually possible. So this thing that's been flying by here, this is our internal daily reporting app. And it's basically just kind of a log for your day that goes to your manager. And all of the office and / management staff fill these out each day, again, either through the web component of the application or through the mobile. And it syncs up to the web app. And then that app then passes your report on to your supervisor to check out. And you guessed it. It's authenticated through Active Directory. So if you get fired or whatever, you don't get to use the app anymore. So these are kind of the cornerstone. These are the big moments for us. Now we also had a couple of smaller moments which were interesting. One was a presentation I did at DevCon a couple of years back, which was about schema-based applications. And essentially, what it is an application where the structure of the application is actually held in the data of the system. So we have a series of tables that define the forms, the fields that are on the forms, the data that's collected, the rules for the data that's collected, and then whether or not it's a drop-down or a checkbox or what have you. And the cool thing about that is that when the application syncs up to the server, we can actually deliver new form definitions down to the remote client. So essentially, we could use it for kind of interactive prototyping for people who weren't even in the office. We could say, oh, well, you know, check this out and let us know what your forms look like. And then as we go through that, we'll update the definitions, and then you can continue to see what it would look like. This is it's an example. It's an old example. Sorry, Mike. These are from my other presentation. It's been updated. It looks a lot sexier now, but I didn't have a chance to get them in. So this is an example of what you can do with the design. Basically, you can have a series of records on the top here. You have your entry values on the bottom. We have the menu on the right-hand side. And even the navigation, the menu is dynamic. All of it's data-based. These are all just fields showing this data. So you can literally turn this thing upside down and inside and out when you're working with it to accommodate whatever kind of form data you want to collect. It also collected photographs. It had a photo editing thing in it so the people who were working in the field could capture images of whatever it was that they were working on. This is an example of something that I was playing with before, kind of taking that idea and using it for application prototyping. So again, all the modules, all the tabs, all the fields, all the field names and everything, they're all dynamic. So you could sit with somebody and you could say, okay, well, we're talking about a certain kind of app, and you could lay out what the different modules would look like, and then you can define what the tabs would look like in each one of those sections. You can basically just data enter all of the field names right on the layout and then title each group, and then kind of interact with the client like, oh, this is what it would look like. And this is what it looks like when it runs, so that they can actually see what the interface looks like. It's good for getting that initial inspiration of looking at FileMaker live, and then they get a million ideas, and you can do that before they start looking at your actual finished product. So why the heck do we use FileMaker? Well, like I said, mobile's huge for us. Mobile basically allows us to put a relatively inexpensive computer in the field, in someone's hands, that is, you know, we put a tough case around it so that they can't destroy it, and it has a keyboard on it, and I think it's about the lightest weight Wi-Fi enabled, cell enabled computer that you can put out in the field. Because we give them a cell card, we give them a Wi-Fi card, so if there's any way that they can connect to the internet, they can do so. And with our timekeeping app, they can fill out the records that are in their timesheet, and then when they're ready, they can hit sync, and then sync those records up. So they can basically define them wherever they are. They might, of course, be out of cell range, and then when they get back to the trailer, then they can sync those records up. And again, like I said before, that allows us to bridge the geography between the landscape and the client. So the road ahead, basically for us, we're always looking at what we created and can we do it better. And that's when I'm actually in the office, that's what Mike and I spend a lot of time talking about, is can we actually make it better? Can we make it look better? Can we make it work better? What functions have come out that are actually gonna make a difference to what we've built? You know, can we sharpen the saw, as it were? We're still looking at capitalizing what's going on with JSON. And then, of course, for us, Vallard is a group of companies in Canada. So as features for this next phase are drawing to a completion, I have another mandate, which is to deliver this application into other organizations that are within our larger enterprise. So this is going to be a multi-company effort. And basically that's it. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I've got a couple of minutes before I can bring Guy on. Or if you want to go early, Guy, you can. Any questions? Any answers? Okay, Guy, it's all you. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name's Guy. I'm from the UK. That's why I sound funny. But you'll get used to that, hopefully. I just think, amazing work that these guys are doing in the middle of nowhere with no connectivity. We have that back in England. It's called O2. But so just out of interest, who here actually has used the SDK part? Oh, good, promising. So I'm not preaching to the converted. But anyway, so what I want to do is tell you how the SDK has been transformative for our company and how it's really driven our growth by enabling us to do offline work in the field with our installers and sales representatives, but also how generally FileMaker as a platform with Apple technologies has been absolutely amazing for us. So I put together a little film for you. So yeah, this is the guys I work for. That's Harvey Water Softeners, and well, we make water softeners. A bit about me. I have been there for like a million years. I'm their only in-house developer. Kind of built every system they have. So we run the entire company on it, as you can see, and just sort of private stuff. I've got a very patient wife. I've got 2 kids, 2 rabbits, 2 horses. So I'm really glad to be here this week. It's been great. So anyway, this is the Natural History Museum in London. It's an amazing place. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, 2018, apart from being the 30th anniversary of FileMaker, is the 40th anniversary of Harvey Softeners. And this is where we had our birthday bash earlier this year. So it was pretty epic. 600 people came. The food was pretty good, if you like whale. But it was also the only year ever that I have been forced to wear a tuxedo, much to my wife's amusement. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm punching above my weight there, that's quite right. So also, this year we won the Queen's Award for Enterprise, which is quite a big deal for us, which our team, who are ever humble, really they're a shy lot. Anyway, the Queen came to tea. Well, she didn't come to tea. But word of advice, if you do have a picture of the Queen, don't put her in the window, because it nearly caused a pile-up outside the factory, which was quite embarrassing. So anyway, we started in 1978, and this is the guy who started it. He is called Harvey Bowden, obviously, because he's very shy and retiring. And you can tell it's the 70s, because just check out the colour of that van. It's absolutely hideous. So that was us then, and this is us now. So you can see it's a bit different. So we've been in the factory since 2006, and it's been an amazing journey and privilege to work there, because I've met some really nice people along the way. But it's also really exciting what we've managed to achieve with FileMaker as a platform throughout, because like I said, we started off with it and we've grown with it now. So, but it's not all been plain sailing, and one particular event caused us a fair amount of grief, and I imagine it caused a lot of people an amount of grief as well. Has anyone, any ideas? 2008? No one's going to say, well, how about this? It was the dreaded financial crash. So the thing is about this, obviously, is it caused a lot of pain globally, and it was bad news for small businesses all over the world. Now, obviously, we just moved into our factory 2 years before with a nice, shiny new mortgage as well. So obviously, we were in trouble. So if we look at the business model of our time, you can see mainly we are very sort of B2B. So, you know, being B2B business, you're dependent on the success of other businesses. And during recession, that's pretty difficult. But you can see the little blue wedge there, that is our retail department, which is a in-house owned department, so it's 100% process that we can control. So that was a little glimmer of hope. So if we look at the guys in the department, it was a very small department. We had 4 office admins, 10 sales reps and 10 installers. And the output of the department was kind of equivalent to like a couple of our large dealers. Nothing to set the world on fire, but still not bad. Now you've got to remember that in 2006 we moved into the factory. 2007 we kind of lost the plot a bit, which I think might have had something to do with the fact that we were still parting from 2006 and the new factory. But when 2008 hit the ground running, we knew we had to do something about it. So the orders from above were to sell, sell, sell. So they expanded our team a little bit, and they pushed, and they pushed, and they kept going. So they managed to nearly quadruple or triple the sales, which is no mean feat, except they ran into a massive problem, and that's the system they were using. I mean, it was a 35-year-old process, and it just couldn't scale. Anyone got any ideas what system it could have been? Thank you. No, it was this. It was the glorious paper database, paper diaries, paper orders, paper installer diaries, the usual kind of horror story, okay? So they were running the department with that kind of sales purely on paper. And even the paperwork had a tough time, because after 8 weeks in the field, that's what it looked like. It was barely legible, and some poor soul had to type that into a system somewhere. But the point I want to make here is that this is just 6 years ago, which is scary. They were still using photocopiers and faxes. So the retail manager asked me if I could write them a system, and I said, yeah, sure, what's the brief? So he gave me a fairly high-level brief. But I said, well, that's not very helpful. Can you be a bit more specific? He said, well, yeah. So I said, well, thank you. Okay, so, right, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. So I'm actually going to show you what we did. First process we came up with was to sort the office out. So here's the actual retail system itself. Now, historically, all the leads came in from the website, but previously, the website would send an email to someone in the office to fill in the form. So the first thing I did with FileMaker is to build a little custom web publishing sort of endpoint that the website could talk to. So it's just a simple matter for the form to actually build a notification. There you go. So you click on the notification, you go into the entry, you tidy it up, phone the customer. We've got full address verification for 29 million postcodes on our system, so we can auto-fill the address and we can geocode basic Centroid information. I then decided it would be quite a good idea to integrate the phone system, so we can just dial from FileMaker directly to our desk phones, and of course logging the call at the same time, which is a huge benefit. And I thought, well, why stop there? Let's just reverse the back end of the phone system as well, so we can trigger events. So that's FileMaker just doing a live scan of the output of the phone system, and that will trigger events and notifications and whatnot. So that was a huge benefit. But the real benefit was the diary process, because bookings were painful. It took about 10 minutes. So if we actually look at a rep booking now, we can see the electronic diary here. Now these reps cover that area, but this is a list of the entire rep team. These guys and girls have all different dates and times of work, so it's quite a complicated system to manage. The distances there are just sort of line of sight distances to give us some kind of clue how far the previous job and next job is going to be. But it's really simple matter of just clicking on the button to book the appointment. So this saved a huge amount of time for bookings. I mean, typically a booking on the phone would take about 10 minutes previously after everyone was going around the paper diaries. So the next step was to sort the installer diaries out. So we have a 2-level system here. On the left-hand side is what the computer considers as available slots, and on the right is a manual override. But it's basically worked out of how complex a job is and how far it is away. So we get a kind of a temperature colour system here. So if it's red, chances are it's a bit too far out, so wouldn't bother with it. If it's a green one, you should be okay. So there's a filtered list based on how complex a job is and how far away, and also other things. But anyway, that's all done for them, so they don't really have to think much, which is streamline the process. So that was one step. Obviously, the next step was to sort out the reps. So, of course, we turned to FileMaker Go. Now, the advantage of Go, obviously, is that you can work offline, and that was the main advantage for us. So here is FileMaker Go 13 back in the day. See, master view back then, it was possible. And we had rudimentary support for Google Maps with URL control, which is quite basic. But, you know, it put them in the right direction. But the key thing we did was to actually make it look like the paperwork, because it was familiar. It took quite a bit of programming to actually do it, but the end result is that the guys picked up the iPad, knew what they were doing. So that was a bit of a win. And the most complicated bit of the process was to sort out the installers, because the amount of data they need to record is much more voluminous, if that makes sense. So we went to a rolling diary. We built an SMS gateway in there so they could send a little text to the customer saying they're on the way. Full sat nav.
Head west on High Street, 8247 towards Hipley Street.
And the amount of data they can actually edit data on the main system, but they have to do it very carefully, obviously. But this is all done with XML. So, but it was interesting at this time, our installation and service department merged, and they wanted me to write a new app to control all that. And I said, well, we don't need to. We can get the iPad to do it. So we did, just built an iPad version. So this is the installer screen, so you can see lots and lots of information they need to record. It's kind of mandatory. If they don't do it, they don't get paid. So this is a good way of making them do it. But the service engineers only really need to see pictures of the job and any sort of history. So that's what we did. Now, the big thing was building an electronic store into the iPad so the guys could order bits and bobs. Now, they've got about 3,000 items on it. And the reason I did this is because previously the installers would turn up with a bit of paper with the notes on. The guys would run around trying to pack the orders and get it all out the door, and it was a nightmare. So this way, the guys come in the morning and all the orders are on the main system waiting for them to be picked. So that's that. Now, the point is that the retail system is now an event-driven system. So we've got data coming from the web as in leads, and we've got data coming from the iPads, which drive the full system, basically. But the most important thing is that when we process an order, that talks to all our other systems. So a process that would take the paperwork usually 2 weeks to go around the departments and be signed off, now takes seconds. Of course, we use Go, it's a no-brainer, but as Peter was saying, with Go, there's a bit of a problem with the user. You know, if you've got people who aren't that tech savvy, they kind of struggle a bit. So the great thing about the SDK, which they released, which was a miracle and an epiphany moment for me, is that it's a totally customizable headless version of Go, which means, coincidentally, we had a massive rebrand, so we can actually build a Harvey app, not a FileMaker Go app. They're the same thing, but no one knows that. So this is how it works. Basically, you get a command line utility that builds an Xcode project for you. And all you have to do is pop a little solution file in there. Now that handles your navigation and logic. And then we can add the pretty icons that the marketing department would like. So there they are. And even in this case, we've actually bundled custom fonts in there as well to match the guidelines, which you can't do on Go, so that's a great benefit of this system. And of course, when you fire up the old simulator, it's not a Go app, it's a Harvey app. But it's still Go. So inevitably, the company grew, so we had more and more people, which is great, but obviously more and more people need more and more devices. And so in a minute, you'll be able to see, when the last one falls, we have these number of devices in the organization, and you can see the vast majority is iOS. We've even got a few Apple TVs running dashboards. So what do we do? Well, we basically have a secret weapon, and that is Apple's deployment program. So here we can see that's our deployment program. Basically, we buy from Apple, and all the devices will then appear on our MDM system, which is basically a Mac Mini running server app, which is basically looking after our users, but more importantly, our content and our enterprise apps. So let's have a look at our basic setup. So as you hit here, you can see on the left-hand side is our normal behind the firewall type stuff. Everything's on standard ports. Up the top there is the Apple deployment program machine and the Apple MDM, which crosses the thing. But all our iPads go connect through a FileMaker web publishing engine over XML or REST API. Now, it does take a lot more time to set the programming up for the actual iPad, but the net result is we can hang 250 plus devices off the back of this with pretty little performance hit. So how fast is it? Well, this is an iPad straight out of the box. We're going to turn on the network, which helps. And when you've done that, very fast typing, it actually connects to the deployment server, which then points to our MDM server, which then sends the credentials to the iPad, and the iPad sets itself up, which is great, because we've only got 2 people in IT, and they wouldn't want to be doing it manually. So after that, the actual enterprise app is pushed, deployed, and then when they open it, we're back in FileMaker land, so I'm happy. So what this is basically is a content management system. The iPad identifies itself to our FileMaker system back end, and it works out who the person is, and then it sends the right modules down to be downloaded. Now, these are all just container files that are containing FileMaker modules that make up the whole solution, and some video files. Now, the advantage of this is that we can deploy changes practically instantly. If they log out of the app and log in again, it will check to see if there's any updates, and then automatically deploy them. So it's a neat little system, and it just means that the guys in the field don't have to worry about the boring technicalities, they can get on with the job. And here we can see a finished diary, which is Ben, who's one of our sales reps. So let's have a quick look at it. You can see all the custom fonts and branding now, which keep marketing happy. We went for the rolling diary again, just because it is just a bit more efficient than the master view. And that's what they would see. But the most important thing we've got here is we've now turned the iPad into a selling tool. So it's now an electronic presenter. So this was a huge benefit, because previously it had a ring binder with pages. So we've made it smart. We're using all the standard FileMaker Go features like transitions. Here we're actually calculating a water hardness in someone's house, which would then send that information on to our production department, who would then work out how many softeners of particular gearing they need to make. So it's quite beneficial for production. There's a man himself. We have a testimonial system, which is basically a web viewer pointing to a review site. We've got nothing to hide, so we show the good and bad ones. Of course, the AV kit's brilliant on the iPad, so we can run some really nice videos. And I can't kind of stress how important videos are for marketing. It just makes such a difference. It just makes a much more polished experience. We have some interactive forms that the customer can fill in. We've got little animations there. We've got a little softener picker, so you can work out what criteria you need and what kind of softener you'll get. So it's all using standard FileMaker stuff, sliding tile panels, nothing amazing, but it just seems to look quite nice. Most importantly, the paperwork is not paperwork, it's PDFs and it's crisp and clean and just looks way more professional. So the question is, was it a success? Well, I can quite pleased to say that, yeah, when we first rolled it out, there was a significant improvement straight away. When the iPads came along, we had another peak in performance, a bit of a quiet year in 2015, but as you can see, it's made a heck of a difference. So, now I'm pretty sure everyone's heard about custom apps all week. So, I mean, what is a custom app? Well, to me, a custom app is an app that fills a hole, basically, something that doesn't exist. So we had exactly this problem with our retail department wanting a door canvassing app. Now, what's a door canvassing app? Well, it's basically old school. Knock on the door, say hello, introduce yourself, introduce the company, and hopefully get a booking. But they wanted some kind of platform to manage this. So I built a little app for them. So this is the admin app. All we're going to do is allocate an area to one of our guys. So there's Chris. So we're going to give him... he's got 3 territories already, but I think he probably could do with some more work. So we're going to chuck some more down for him. So let's give him nearly 5,000 properties. That'll keep him busy. So that's now loading data from our postcode database, which we store the Royal Mail postcode, which is 29 million records. That's all in FileMaker. And then after that, we'll do some cross-checking with our other systems to see if they're an existing customer or they've preferred not to be contacted. And then that builds that list there. Now on the iPad, the guys have an extra module. Looks familiar because it's just the same iPad. But now they have areas they can look at. So now they're going to click on that load data button, and this is 5,000 records on an iPad in the field, and that's how quick it imports. So that's quite impressive. And then the actual container there contains a little map with a KML outline of the area so they can see the roads they are. Now we've done that as a PDF because we don't want to use up any network resources. And this is what it looks like. So you've got all the addresses on the left and all the statuses on the right. It's really that simple. It's not. But it fulfills a purpose. So we actually see it working. If you click on a road that hasn't got anything on it, we can actually canvas it. Now we built a little script engine at the back of the admin panel that allows the guys to drag and drop images on the admin server, and then when it loads on the iPad, it brings all that down so they can run custom scripts and displays. And here we've got some multi-choice images and a rather rudimentary scoring system that they wanted, and I wasn't going to argue, so I built it. And that's fundamentally it. So, and what do the guys see at the office? Well, they actually get live data back, so they can see how many doors they've knocked and how many bookings they've done. And we can also use this as a management tool to see the performance of the team over different periods of time. So, if we look at what they've done last week, we can see that they have done, I can't remember, it's 4,000, I think, 4,000 doors they knocked on. So this is a useful tool. So it didn't exist, and it was very quick to make. Now, interestingly, they were going to outsource this. They went to 2 app makers, and they got 2 quotes back, one at £17,000, one came in at £50,000. So I managed to get hold of the brief, and we just quickly knocked that up in an afternoon of the actual sort of prototype, which worked, and that kind of got us the gig, because they've saved themselves 50 grand. So, as a developer, how many of you get asked this question? How easy would it be to do something really difficult? So on an iPad, route optimization, those algorithms aren't much fun. They're pretty heavy computing power, so that's a no-no. The trouble is the iPad at the time was a service installer iPad, which was written in Go 15, which of course had fairly limited support for the curl command. Well, none, actually. So when 16 came out, it was like a Swiss Army toolkit for curl commands. So now we can play with all kinds of APIs, you know, that the desktop version can without having to resort to plugins. It's all native, and it's brilliant. So to solve this problem, I picked 2 APIs. So there's Graphhopper and Ideal Postcodes, which is a UK-based postcode system. So let's have a look at the problem. So here we have an order table. So Ideal Postcodes will fill in any blank longitude and latitudes for us. So that's one API call. It's also free, that's why I'm using it. And then Graphhopper will just reorder that list and sort it out into a optimized route. Now, how quick is it? Well, let's look at the actual editor that Graphhopper provides. So all we've got to do is drop a JSON model of the problem in there. So it's just basically order ID by the longitude and latitude. And then we're just going to show the problem. So you can see we've got a cluster down there with the one slap bang in the middle of nowhere, which is really helpful. But we'll just see what we can optimize. And with a quick click of the optimize button, you can see the solution. So how quick is this on an iPad? Well, this iPad has had, well, the iPad you'll see in a minute, that one has had 4G and Wi-Fi disabled, so it's just 3G. There's our customer list with the same data. It's all in numerical order, as you can see. So now we're going to do a route optimization on an iPad. So just click the little marker, do the request. This is 2 endpoints, by the way. Give it a couple of seconds, and there's your result. So that is an optimized route for the driver to go from, and it will reorder that list depending on what's added or taken away. It's that quick. So, what difference has FileMaker made? Well, to the company, enormous difference. If we look how retail has performed in 2008, you can see there's a constant trend here that the blue bit gets bigger. Now that's important because that's our future. Now dealer and European sales kind of fluctuate, but this year, for the first time, it has actually sneaked beyond our other 2 channels. So if we actually look at the output, we can see what we were then and what we are now. So that's a much bigger slice of blue pie. That's security, that's a future that we can drive forward. If we actually look at the numbers involved, back in 2008, that was 10,000 odd for an entire year. We're only halfway through the year, we've hit 19,000 odd. So this year, we're going to hit 40,000 units, which is a company record. Which leads us to one final problem. And that problem being, we need a bigger factory. So this is our new factory. It's going to come online in 2021. It's 3 times the size. But the really cool thing is that we've got some really cool neighbours. We've got McLaren's just down the road, McLaren F1, so I'm really looking forward to the company car that year. If that happens. Anyway, so that concludes my talk. There's no updates, and thanks for listening. Any questions? No? Any questions for Peter? Oh, the question. Oh, no. This is not supposed to happen. We said this wouldn't happen. Go on, far away.
On your iPad app, the SDK compiled one, you said it uses web publishing to download the files?
No, it uses XML. Well, yeah, it just uses a container file to download the files. So
Right.
it's straight over the HTTP into a container, then out again.
Okay, and those files, then they run locally on the iPad?
That's right. So everything's local to the iPad, and we only sync back changes back to the main thing
How do you do that sync?
through XML.
Through the XML again, so you have scripting in the
Yeah, so
local FileMaker files?
Yeah, any data comes with an ID, so we know we can sync that record back safely.
Okay,
And
and
then
how frequently do you do your syncs?
Well, 90% of the work is done on the iPad, and it's only synced back at the point of order for the retail reps, or when the guys finish an installation and get customer sign-off, that's when we sync it back as a chunk. But because it's such a tiny data packet, it takes no time at all.
Awesome, thank you.
No worries.
How big is your development team?
It's me.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
So,
I do have a quick question. How much of your app runs locally on the iPad, and how much do you run against a FileMaker server?
well, the whole process when they're interacting with the iPad is on the iPad, so there's no live connection whatsoever. It's only at the point of when they complete an order or get sign-off or something, and that's when we do the sync.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Have you got any use cases for things that have been demoed, like IoT and things like that?
Have I done IoT? Mm-hmm. I think you know the answer to that one. yeah. Not within scope of this, but yeah, I've done a fair bit of IoT stuff. So. Any other questions? Well, in that case, I shall play you out to another silly video. Thanks a lot.